This is the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
I'm Stephen A.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Stephen A. Smith Show, coming at you as I love to do every weekday over the airwaves of ESPN Radio, 250 plus markets across the United States of America. And of course, ESPN Radio on Sirius XM, Channel 80. Number to call up as always is 888-729-3776. That's 888-SAY-ESPN. Lots of stuff to get into. About to get into some stuff. It's time for Straight Talk. Brought to you by Straight Talk Wireless. Best phones. Best networks. No contracts. Lots of stuff to get into today. Some basketball stuff with LeBron in Cleveland. That's something worthy of getting into. How my words get misconstrued and how I have to correct the error of other people's ways, which is something I love to do on radio at my discretion, of course. We'll get into all of that. Larry Nassar, the disgraced, serial sexual molester of children, to keep that in mind too now, got sentenced to anywhere from 40 to 175 years. Listening, the judge said herself, I'm giving you your death sentence. You know what I've said? I said it yesterday. I'll start off again by saying this man needs to be thrown under the jail with the sodomites for the rest of his natural days with his disgusting, despicable self. But the Michigan State University president has tendered her resignation. And you got some people that actually believe that's the wrong decision for her to make. I am not one of them. She needs to go. She's gone. Good riddance. Matter of fact, there needs to be an investigation as to whether or not her or others may have been complicit in all of this. And that might require, I'm not talking civil because we know civil cases are coming down the pike. I'm talking criminal. I mean, you can't protect children. Who are you going to be willing to protect? You got to be kidding me. But I'll get into that a little bit later on in the show. And, of course, gambling and the National Basketball Association. We'll touch on that as well. All of that in just a few minutes. But the first order of business is the Hall of Fame. Because yesterday a few guys got in. Jim Thome's of the world, Trevor Hoffman's of the world, Guerrero's of the world. People like that, they got in. What I cared about was Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens. Barry Bonds had 53.8% of the vote. What do you need, Nuno? Like 75% to get in? 74%, 75%? Barry Bonds got 53.8% of the necessary vote for the Baseball Writers Association of America. 53.8% last year. He got 56.4% this year. Clemens got 54.1% last year. He got 57.3% this year. Neither made the Hall of Fame, but they're getting closer. Here's my belief. Barry Bonds should have been in the Hall of Fame. He's really probably the greatest hitter we've ever seen. He was a Hall of Famer before steroids invaded the sport. And guess what? Regardless of what you may say, whether they're bringing up the cream and the clear and how he was exposed for using that, never failed a drug test. The bottom line is when it came to Barry Bonds, he was a Hall of Famer who didn't need the steroids. I understand that other people, you got a whole bunch of people out there that feel you cheat. It don't matter what. I don't look at it that way. I think back to the Mitchell report that came out in 2007. I think about the 103 names that were on that list. How many of them smacked 600 home runs? Or in Barry Bonds' case, more than 700. How many of them did that? I mean, if you got a whole bunch of people doing stuff, but guess what? It didn't work for them. It worked for him. And by the way, it was because he was great before that. Not to mention the fact I'm going to take into consideration excerpts from the Game of Shadows book written by Lance Williams and Mark Finnerawada. When they wrote about how Bonds was a Hall of Fame already, but jealous of what Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa were receiving in terms of attention, endorsements, and what have you. Major League Baseball clearly didn't mind because guess what? Chicks aren't the only one who love the long ball. So do the fellas. And everybody gravitated back to baseball because of the cancellation of the World Series in 1994. And you had lost your fan base. And by virtue of losing your fan base, it was going to take something special to get them back. And Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa brought them back. and the acclaim that they received along the way had Barry Bonds scratching his head saying, wait a minute, I'm better than both of these brothers, and y'all ignoring me. I'm smacking 30 home runs, stealing 30 bases a year. Y'all ain't saying anything about me. I'm a perennial Gold Glover. Y'all ain't saying anything about me. I'm considered one of the best players ever right now. Y'all ain't saying anything about me. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to entertain going a different route. And that's what he did. I don't mind an asterisk put next to his name. I don't mind somebody identifying the fact that he was associated with the steroids era, and by virtue of that it was tainted to some degree. But I don't think you take away the 700-plus home runs he smacked. I don't think you take away the greatness that he put on display, showcasing for you that he's one of, if not the greatest ever. I don't think you do that. I happen to believe the Roger Clemens situation is a tad bit different. I have never, and I want to emphasize this, because I remember, I think the year was back in 2013, when Roger Clemens was acquitted on all charges, when the government took him to court. I believe that was like June 18th, 2012. He was acquitted on all charges that he lied to Congress 4 years earlier, back in 2008, when he insisted he never used steroids or human growth hormones. I got to confess something to y'all. It's going to be a shock for you with what I'm about to tell you. I actually looked at an old article in the New York Times, and I see Roger Clemens, all of his sons hugging him. I got to tell you, that's a beautiful scene. I got to tell you, looking at that picture reminded me, I'm not one of these people that ever thought that Roger Clemens deserved to be in jail. I never liked the fact that the government went after him and tried to put this man in prison. I mean, he was faced with so many charges. If he had gotten convicted on all counts, he would have faced up to 30 years in federal prison. Now, come on. He doesn't deserve that. He never deserved that. But does Roger Clemens deserve to be banned from the Hall of Fame? Absolutely, for one reason and one reason only: sheer stupidity. You see, ladies and gentlemen, Mark McGwire was summoned to Capitol Hill, as was Sammy Sosa, as was Rafael Palmeiro. Barry Bonds, there was a 7-year investigation before you ultimately got him on one charge of trying to obstruct an investigation on PED use. That's all you got on him after 7 years. Roger Clemens was home minding his damn business. And because he was upset about the Mitchell report, he had to come out and emphatically deny it and didn't dare anybody to summon him up to Capitol Hill. That's just stupid. That's just stupid. I mean, if for no other reason than camera time, you know Congress is going to summon you up there once you dared them to. That was just stupid. Just plain sheer stupidity. And let me bring up the wife. And by the way, when I mention Roger Clemens' wife, I'm not casting any aspersions on her whatsoever. She's a fabulous looking woman. And the fact that she admitted under oath that she got steroids injected into her by McNamee, the former strength and conditioning coach that Roger Clemens used. There's no crime. She wasn't playing baseball. And obviously it worked for her because she looked good and took care of herself. And that was one of the components that she used to have herself in tip-top shape. But if McNamee is injecting the wife in the master bedroom with steroids, and somehow around the same time as when Roger Clemens, who was once considered past his prime after playing with the Red Sox, suddenly looks all world for the Yankees and the Houston Astros, and even for the Toronto Blue Jays for a lesser degree, and it happens to coincide with the same time that she's getting steroid shots in the master bedroom from the same strength and conditioning coach. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. That's more than a mere coincidence to me. I mean, I'm sorry to use the analogy, but if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it ain't a damn mongoose. It's a duck. Sorry. My only point about Roger Goodell is this. Roger Goodell. Roger Clemens. I apologize. My only point about Roger Clemens is this. I'm not even getting into the PED use. Because, look, plenty of people that use PEDs weren't getting it done. I'm sitting there and I'm embarrassed by some of the dudes who've gotten busted for using PEDs, and they look like straight garbage while they were drugged up. So clearly the drugs didn't get it done for you. So I'm not going to sit up there and leave people out of the Hall of Fame when they were clearly better than most of their contemporaries, particularly in an era where most of that stuff wasn't being tested for anyway. And practically everybody was taking it like they were taking a bag of Skittles. What I'm getting on Roger Clemens about, unlike the other guys, is this. Nobody was bothering him. All he had to do was shut the hell up and stay home and live his life in a retirement. No one was bothering this man. And he wanted to open his mouth and try to be all defiant. He brought all of that on himself. Barry Bonds didn't bring that on himself. Andy Pettitte didn't bring that on himself. Mark McGwire, who don't know how to plead the fifth, and Sammy Sosa, who suddenly needed a damn interpreter when he showed up to Capitol Hill, and Rafael Palmeiro, who wagged his finger at Congress. They didn't bring that on themselves. Roger Clemens did. Barry Bonds should be in. Roger Clemens should be banned for stupidity. That's Straight Talk Wireless, nationwide coverage on America's largest and most dependable 4G LTE networks. You're listening live to Stephen A. on ESPN Radio. Don't touch that dial. I got more.
You're listening to the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
Interesting story developing before I get to the calls right here at 888-729-3776, 888-SAY-ESPN. Interesting story has developed with the NBA. NBA outlines plan for nationwide sports betting. The NBA, I'm going to read from the article to make sure I misquote no one. Brian Windhorst wrote this yesterday. The NBA wants 1% of every bet made on its games in addition to other regulations, a request that could create massive revenue for the NBA and other sports leagues in the future. That's basically what they want. Spillane, an attorney for the NBA, testified in front of a New York State Senate committee and for the first time made it clear what the league's price would be to become a partner in legalizing the multi-billion-dollar industry. Spillane also said the NBA wants more widespread access to gambling for its fans, pushing for bets to be made legal on smartphones and kiosks and not just inside casinos and racetracks. That would increase the amount of wagering and in turn create more revenue for the league under its desired plan. Ladies and gentlemen, let me say this. I don't blame the NBA one bit for getting involved in all of this. I understand. It's your product. You're the one putting the product out there. And since gambling is a multi-billion-dollar industry, it's something that the NBA should consider because outside of television revenue, meaning the contracts that these leagues have with the television networks, outside of revenue emanating from the television networks, there's no place else that you can generate this kind of revenue for your product. No place else other than gambling. And so it makes perfect sense why the NBA would want to get itself involved in all of this. I understand that. I'm not oblivious to it. I'm not blind to it. I totally get it. I see exactly where they're coming from. But we also need to understand that that law from 1992, where there was a federal ban on gambling, we need to also understand why people like myself and others were supportive of it. First of all, one would argue you bet on horses, not people. And now that you're doing this, once this happens, what's next? How are you going to stop people from gambling on college basketball and college football? Talk about scandals, point shaving and all of that other stuff. Want to make a bet? We have to take that into consideration. By the way, since it's legalized, since you're pushing for it to be legalized, because that's what the NFL, that's what the NBA wants. And if there's a federal law that's instituted that legalizes gambling, how are you going to tell the players they can't gamble? How are you going to tell the coaches they can't gamble? And what kind of effect is that going to have on the sport? And oh, by the way, if you're going to legalize it and you have that kind of mentality, how in the hell can we say anything to Pete Rose? Shouldn't he be inducted into the Hall of Fame the next day? I think so. I think so. See, these are the kind of things that you got to think about. And you also got to think about it from this perspective. The advent of social media has made gambling on sports even more dangerous. Not because of folks in social media, but because of the players' insatiable appetite to resonate in the social media stratosphere. I read a story where it was talking about LeBron James makes over $125,000 per tweet. The man's got 40 million followers. You think he's tweeting for free? You think he's tweeting out of the kindness of his heart or this insatiable appetite he has to express himself? No, he's monetized it and he's getting paid. You think those Instagram posts and those Facebook followings are for nothing? And why do you think the other players want it? Because they realize it's a secondary or supplementary way to monetize their brand. So now that you got gambling into the equation, now you're talking about the potentiality of players and others communicating. And oh, by the way, we saw in the case of Kevin Durant that you could have fake accounts. All of these kind of things are the things you got to be concerned about. The kind of oversight it requires and beyond. I'm not saying no to it. I understand we live in a different world. I totally get that. What I am saying is it's dangerous. And to act like it's not is foolish. Especially in this day and age. If there was no advent of social media and there wasn't such excessive interaction on social media between athletes and folks on social media, that would be different. But you got guys that ain't getting paid that can't shut the hell up. They got to be on social media, defending themselves, explaining themselves, which I understand. Hell, I do it sometimes. But if you now tell them and show them a way where they can get paid for doing it, whether it's open or clandestine or otherwise, you got yourself a problem. You got yourself a problem. It ain't as clean as everybody's trying to act like it is. It's quite dangerous. And it's the kind of thing that needs to be considered. Period. 888-729-3776. It's 888-SAY-ESPN. I'll get into your Hall of Fame talk in just a few minutes, but not before I talk to my resident handicapper out of Las Vegas, the founder for pregame.com, the official odds provider for the Associated Press. He's usually on the air talking with us about football, but obviously he's an odds maker and a handicapper based out of Vegas. He'd happen to know a thing or two about gambling, wouldn't you say? Who better to talk to about this kind of stuff with the NBA and gambling than him? His name is RJ Bell, and he's up next with Stephen A. on ESPN Radio.
Guess what? You're in the middle of the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
Damn it, I mean it!
Waiting for my next guest right now because we definitely need to talk to him about what's going on. International Basketball Association, according to numerous reports, the NBA, an attorney for the NBA, Dan Spillane, testified in front of a New York State Senate committee and for the first time made it clear what the league's price would be to become a partner in legalizing the multi-billion-dollar industry. It's what could ultimately be a seminal moment for sports gambling in America, because the NBA is officially and formally requesting a set of laws that could be the basis for professional sports leagues pushing for national legalized wagering on games. And at some point in time, we got to ask ourselves, is this really, really what we want? Is that really, really what you want? I mean, when you think about it, listen, I don't blame the NBA one bit. If I were in their position, I would do the same thing. And by the way, their asking price of 1% of the bets to take place, I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot. Because you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars that's illegally waged on sports every year. Over $400 billion illegally. But don't mind me. Listen to the founder for pregame.com, the official odds maker for the Associated Press. His Twitter handle is at RJ in Vegas. Our resident handicapper, usually talking to us about football, but this is even more up his alley. This is about gambling in the world of sports. I'm talking about the one and only RJ Bell. He's right here with Stephen A. on ESPN Radio. RJ, how are you, man?
Stephen A., you were ahead of the curve, right? We've been on for years with you. Now the NBA is embracing gambling.
How do you feel about this, the NBA taking this move?
I love it. I love it. Now, I think as we dig into the details, what they want, the NBA is not going to get. They want 1% of the amount bet in their pocket off the top. Now, if you think about it, 1% seems like a small amount, but remember, of the amount bet, the sports books, their top line revenue is typically only 5%. So let's say $1 million is bet, they typically are going to make $50,000 before, though, they pay anybody, before technology, all the other expenses, before taxes. They're only making $50,000 on the million. Well, the NBA wants 10,000 of that 50 right off the top. They will not get that, but there will be, I think, some number, probably about 0.25%, that the NBA and the other leagues will take off the top to participate.
Well, when we talk about this, you say this has been going on for a long time. You say you love the fact that the NBA is making this move. Why do you love it so much when obviously the integrity of the sport is something that's always going to be in question, and obviously that argument is not going to go anywhere now? Gambling does invite that level of scrutiny. Why are you so supportive of this?
Okay, this is a great question. Now, I'm not sure. I should know, Stephen. Do you have kids or not?
I do. Yes,
okay.
I do.
So I'm guessing when you were in high school, you you had a beer or two.
Yeah, a beer or two.
Now, when your kids are 16 or 17, if they say, I want to have a beer or two, you're going to be okay with it?
No, I'm not going to be okay, but I know they're going to do it anyway because they're kids, and this is what kids do.
That is it. You just said it. Gambling is happening anyway. If somehow, some way, we could wave a wand and make gambling disappear, we could debate that. Now, I would be on one side. I would say it's okay, but it's still a reasonable debate. But gambling is happening anyway. That's the given. So now the question is, if that's the given, just like the reality is most kids are going to have a beer or two, you just hope they do it as safely as possible, right? Well, I want gambling to be as safe as possible, and the way to do that is regulation and scrutiny. Whenever authorities are watching what's going on, the odds of corruption goes down. Whenever it's on the black market in the dark, the odds of corruption go up.
I guess what I'm asking is this. That's always been the issue. That's always been the case in terms of its participation. We always knew that it was. Based on your logic, this should have happened a long, long time ago. What's been the procrastination?
A couple of things. Great question, by the way. Think back to Adam Silver, and I think he was very forward thinking, but it's been almost 3 years ago. He wrote in the New York Times an op-ed and said, listen, daily fantasy is pretty much gambling. We are going to be partners, equity partners with daily fantasy. For us to sit and act like that's okay, but betting on the players is okay, but betting on the teams is somehow egregiously bad, that's absurd. So let's embrace that reality, is what Silver said, Commissioner Silver, in his op-ed. And he said, let's find a way to do this the correct way. So on one hand, I think daily fantasy has made the hypocrisy too much to bear. On the other hand, there's more money to be made now, Stephen A., and here's why. Back 20 years ago, it was normal betting. You bet before the game. Now it's in-game betting. What's in-game betting? It's, let's say the Lakers are down by 10 in the second quarter. You can still bet the game. And you can bet the game with 2 minutes left. You can bet if he's going to make a free throw or not. Literally in Europe, which is ahead of the United States in this regard, you can sit there on your TV set and see the odds, and with your smart TV, make the bets. So imagine now the league with the networks, and they have integrated in-game betting. It's going to be huge, huge money for the leagues. That's why the pot has gotten bigger, and thus they're more inclined to want a piece of it.
But the deal is sports leagues have been signing multi-billion-dollar television contracts for years, which means they've been raking in money. So considering that reality, what's been the procrastination on this all of this time? Based on what you're saying, it's very logical and the step that it should have been taken years ago. What's been the holdup?
It's because they were able to have their cake and eat it too. Right. So there was an old story with Pete Rozelle, right? Former NFL commissioner. Yep. They asked him, if you could snap your fingers and make all gambling disappear, would you? And he gave a very sly answer. And it was like, you know the answer, right? But I'm not going to say it. So they got to benefit from it, right? All of the betting going on without having to, they could be sanctimonious above it and still financially benefit from it. Now, being sanctimonious is even more hypocritical. It sounds absurd to say.
Hold on with that point, RJ, because how were they benefiting from it if it wasn't legalized and they didn't get a piece of the action in a literal sense like they're trying to do now with the 1% of the amount bet? How were they benefiting from it?
The residual interest in the games.
Got it.
Right? Think about it. ESPN, love the network. It's Tuesday night. There's a MAC game on, college football, and one team's winning by 22 in the second half. Who's watching that game? If they're like, either the family, right, the hardcore fans, or if you've got a bet because the team that's up 22 is laying 17, or the over-under is still undecided, right? Al Michaels is famous for saying, well, this game now is really over because it just went over the total.
Because you're basically telling me not just the leagues, but the networks themselves, everybody buys into that because anything that's going to keep eyeballs on the games because of personal vested interest ultimately benefits everybody but the poor loser that's gambling.
Exactly. And remember, part of the leagues getting involved, I think hopefully will be more money for problem gambling because there is problem gambling, but no more than problem eating, right? Too many pizzas, problem drinking, drugs, prescription or illegal. I mean, there's all kind of addictive things in the world.
Well, let me ask you this, though. Let me ask you this, RJ, because obviously you're out of Vegas. You know what the hell you're talking about. You know this stuff backwards and forwards. We're talking to RJ Bell, resident handicapper for the show, out of Vegas, right here with Stephen A. on ESPN Radio. RJ, here's the deal. How many gamblers, percentage-wise, actually win?
That's a great question. We estimate about 3%.
3%.
That's it. 97 out of 100 lose. But you know something? They lose about as much. If you bet, and I know you're not a bettor, but let's say a random person bet $100 a game. Now, we talked about that 5% being the theoretical hold, where if they're just flipping coins, they're going to lose about 5%. So let's say you bet 3 games a weekend for $100. Well, you're going to lose about $15 in the long run, right? $5 each game times 3. That's like going to a movie. So if people are able to do it recreationally and they have fun with it, do you have more fun going to the movie or betting 3 games over the weekend? Make a choice. Now, if it gets to be a problem, that's a different story, but that's the same thing with having a beer.
Before I let you get on out of here, from a legal perspective, they talk about how $4 to $5 billion has been generated off of gambling last year or so, but illegal gambling has generated in excess of over $400 billion. How much money would you say is out there for the leagues for the leagues and for everybody to cash in on in terms of the amount bet? How much dollars are we talking about if this becomes legalized?
Well, if we assume the 1% number, which I think is really high, well, you have $400 billion, so 1% of that would be $4
Yeah, but I'm saying ignore the NBA and their 1%. I'm talking about that $400 billion. Is that an accurate number of what's illegally bet, or do you think it's higher?
I think it's higher. Now, Reuters actually came out with a number a couple years ago that said they think upwards of $1 trillion. So that would be over double $400 billion is bet on sports betting. And here's the other thing. How many people would be inclined to bet sports if it were legal? As much as that legal taboo doesn't affect some people, the fact it's illegal, hey, I've got a guy down the bar, no big deal. Some people don't want, important jobs or whatever. They don't want to bet if it's illegal. So I think the amount of betting would go up some, and I think you're talking about, billions of dollars over even a few years that the leagues themselves in aggregate, the NFL, the NBA could benefit.
Don't you worry, or don't we have a reason to be worried, RJ, considering the advent of social media, the players' insatiable appetite to communicate on social media? If you've got folks gambling and you've got players playing around on social media and beyond, having false and fake accounts and things of that nature as well, isn't it a greater chance, the Black Sox scandal, the Pete Rose scandal, isn't there greater chances of us seeing more of that in the future if this becomes legalized?
I don't think so, because I think it's back to scrutiny. Let's use the financial markets as an example, right? So pre-Great Depression, there was very little regulation on the stock market. And what was the case? There was corruption out the wazoo. Joe Kennedy, JFK's dad, made all his money, or a lot of it, on the stock market with corruption. What happened when the crash happened in 29 is FDR later brought in Joe Kennedy to run the SEC, not the league, the Securities and Exchange Commission. And now, as people get watched, there's less corruption. Let me ask you this, not that you would do anything illegal, but let's say a normal person was thinking, I'm going to maybe think about doing something illegal because I can make $100K from it. If you feel like the authorities are watching, aren't you less inclined to do it? That's what's going on now. If the government gets involved, if the leagues get involved, if they spend some of this 0.25% or 1% on integrity, which is pretty much watching the money come in and making sure nothing is unusual, the odds of corruption go down because the people are being watched.
My man, I appreciate you as always. Thanks for enlightening me on this particular subject, RJ. Really, really appreciate you. Take care of yourself.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you, Stephen A.
The one and only RJ Bell, our resident handicapper, usually talking NFL stuff with us, but this was of particular importance considering the NBA making a concerted effort to help gambling get legalized in the United States of America. There's no other way to put that. Number to call up is 888-729-3776. It's 888-SAY-ESPN. We'll get to your calls and more in a minute. You're listening live to the Stephen A. Smith Show, ESPN Radio.
Guess what?
You're in the middle of the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
Damn it, I mean it.
Hour number 2, we'll get back into Major League Baseball. It's Hall of Fame voting. Barry Bonds out. Roger Clemens out. Had me thinking about Lance Armstrong and his serial lying self. Larry Nassar, the disgraced physician from Michigan State. You got some people out there calling for Michigan State to receive the death penalty. And I'm not sure I disagree. I mean, I got to think about this long and hard because Tom Izzo is maybe my favorite coach in all of college basketball. I love that man. And then D'Antonio, the Michigan State football coach, has done a fabulous job with that program. But you've got girls that have been molested by this man. And I mean, this is such a devastating blow to the university and its integrity. Its president resigned yesterday. And to me, I'm not sure a resignation is enough. I think this woman, Ms. Simon, I think there's an investigation, that warrants an investigation as to her culpability in all of this. They were doing their own investigation. They withheld findings to law enforcement officials. I mean, something has to be done. But I know one thing that needed to be done has already been done. He will spend the rest of his natural life in prison. And I hope he's thrown at the bottom of the jail with the sodomites. I really do. That's right. I said it. But I'll also tell you this. Keep him alive now. He needs to suffer. Death is too easy. Hour number 2 up next with Stephen A. on ESPN Radio.
That's just a sample of what you'll hear on the Stephen A. Smith Show. Weekdays at 1 p.m. Eastern on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.